Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to Millennium TV Around the World News. This is Fahmid Islam with you. Before moving on, let's look at this week's top stories. Protesters say Turkey's Erdogan must step down. Sickening sex abuse alleged in car by UN peacekeepers. Police workers and students clash again in Paris. South Korea repatriates Chinese soldiers killed in Korean War. And crackdown on illegal migrants bound for Hong Kong. Obama hosts world leaders at White House. US, South Korea, Japan pledge security cooperation. India bridge collapse kills 14, scores feared trapped. Republicans alarmed at talk US may ease Iran trade. And will Brazil's Dilma Rousseff be impeached? Car bomb kills police in Turkey's Diyarbakir. Weekend Boko Haram sends girl bombers against Cameroon. Those were the headlines, now the details. Demonstrators unite in Washington, D.C., calling Turkish President Tayyip Erdogan a terrorist whose rule must be overthrown. They came to protest against Turkish President Tayyip Erdogan, calling him, among other things, a terrorist for his hardline stance against Turkey's Kurdish community seeking independence. Erdogan was delivering a speech across the road at the Brookings Institution, while thousands of miles away in the Turkish city of Diyarbakir, police were investigating a bomb attack that killed several of their colleagues, an attack Erdogan calls outrageous. He says,
as we corner the terrorist organizations, the terrorist organization shows its heinous face through such attacks and acts.
Southeastern Turkey has been beached by violence since a ceasefire between the outlawed Kurdistan Workers' Party and the government collapsed last July.
Thousands of militants have been killed in the conflict. Erdogan says his government's fight is a simple matter of Turkish security.
Long live Kurdistan!
But these protesters say it's time to give the Kurds what they want and hold Erdogan accountable.
UN and French peacekeepers accused of grim abuses in restive African nation, including bestiality with children. The United Nations announced 108 new sexual abuse cases allegedly by international peacekeepers in Central African Republic, with the vast majority of victims being children. A report by a US-based advocacy group said 3 girls in car told UN staff they were tied up and forced to have sex with a dog by a French military commander in 2014. UN spokesman Stephanie Dujarric on Thursday called the allegations shocking to the core and promised exemplary disciplinary action if they are proven to be true. France's UN ambassador Francois Delattre called the allegations sickening and odious. The accusations, dating from 2013 through last year, were first announced by the group AIDS-Free World late on Wednesday. Dujarric told reporters that UN can't confirm the allegations late on Wednesday. A report published in late January condemned the UN for failing to respond to allegations of child abuse against peacekeepers in the Central African Republic. The independent investigation said the UN handling of the case was seriously flawed, accusing of it not taking the required action after the alleged abuse of young boys by French soldiers became known.
Over the past week, UNICEF staff from the office in Bangui have undertaken 4 visits to meet with the 4 alleged victims. UNICEF is also working with local partners to help the girls receive medical care and is assessing their psychosocial needs.
Transportation workers and high school students are protesting against plans for a pro-business loosening of the country's protective labor laws. French rail and air traffic suffered serious disruption on Thursday after transport staff stopped work and took to the streets along with high school students to challenge plans for a pro-business loosening of the country's protective labor laws. The day of protest, the 4th in a month, has been billed by a local media as a make-or-break test of strength for President François Hollande. Plagued by low popularity and a jobless rate stuck stubbornly about 10% as mid-2017 elections loom. The 3 protests to date have been low-key by the standards of past French strikes, but organizers hope to mobilize more people this time. South Korea holds a handover ceremony to return the remains of 36 Chinese soldiers killed during the 1950-53 Korean War to China. South Korean honor guards repatriate the remains of 36 Chinese soldiers killed during the Korean War. Soldiers fought for North Korea and were returned in a symbolic gesture of friendship. Millions were killed in the war and 5 million became refugees. Police arrest thousands of illegal migrants attempting to get into Hong Kong. Police stop a van in Shenzhen, China as it attempts to cross into neighboring Hong Kong. Inside are illegal migrant workers, some of Pakistani and Vietnamese descent. They are just some of the 3,000 or so illegal migrants who have been arrested since early February as part of a crackdown on smuggling rings. Both Hong Kong and mainland Chinese police forces were involved in the effort. Director of Border Control Department of Ministry of Public Security Yin Chengyun says,
and their main objective was to make money working as laborers. This has triggered various other crime problems. It has seriously disturbed the socio-economic order of the mainland and has affected the social stability of Hong Kong.
Chinese state media say crime syndicates in Hong Kong were the chief culprits behind the smuggling. The migrants chose to enter Hong Kong through mainland China because of lax border controls and easily obtainable visas.
U.S. President Barack Obama hosts a working dinner at the White House for leaders attending the Nuclear Security Summit. U.S. President Barack Obama hosted a working dinner at the White House on Thursday for leaders attending the Nuclear Security Summit. Just as fears of nuclear terrorism are rising, U.S. President Barack Obama's drive to lock down vulnerable atomic materials worldwide seems to have lost momentum and could slow further. With less than 10 months left in office to follow through on one of his signature foreign policy initiatives, Obama will convene leaders from more than 50 countries in Washington this week for his 4th and final Nuclear Security Summit, a high-level diplomatic process that started and will end on his watch. A boycott by Russian President Vladimir Putin, apparently unwilling to join in a U.S.-dominated gathering at a time of increased tensions between Washington and Moscow, adds to doubts that the meeting will yield major results. The recent deadly militant attacks in Brussels have fueled concern that Islamic State could eventually target nuclear plants and develop radioactive dirty bombs, a topic that may well be uppermost in leaders' minds as they meet. Despite significant progress by Obama in persuading dozens of countries to rid themselves of bomb-making materials or reduce and safeguard stockpiles, much of the world's plutonium and enriched uranium remains vulnerable to theft. Japan and South Korea recommitted themselves with U.S. President Barack Obama to each other's security amid ongoing threats from North Korea following a meeting alongside the Nuclear Security Summit in Washington.
And our shared commitment to promoting a more peaceful world. We are united in our efforts to deter and defend against North Korean provocations. We recognize that our security is linked, that we have to work together to meet this challenge. And we also recognize that it is important to the entire international community to vigilantly enforce the strong UN security measures that were passed in light of some of the ballistic missile and nuclear activity that Pyongyang has been engaging in. We've directed our teams to work diligently in the coming weeks and months to elaborate additional steps that we can take collectively in order to ensure that we have a denuclearized Korean Peninsula.
In order to jointly respond to such circumstances, we confirmed our commitment to strengthen the trilateral cooperation at all levels, which was a major achievement of this meeting.
A bridge under construction in the bustling Indian city of Calcutta collapsed on Thursday, killing at least 14 people with more than 100 people feared trapped. The bridge collapsed around noon local time, crushing rickshaws, cars and pedestrians. Rescue workers are now racing against time, searching for survivors through the rubble. So far, at least 14 people are confirmed dead. More are expected. O.P. Singh, the Director General of India's National Disaster Response Force, says more than 100 people are feared trapped. He says,
because there's a lot of concrete, we're using cutters of all sorts to make holes in the debris so that we can make an entry. Only once we gain entry will the situation of the people trapped become clear.
The bridge was under construction at the time it collapsed, and residents say concrete had been laid the night before. The company building the bridge says it will fully cooperate with investigators as the search for victims continues.
There were many people standing under the bridge, one person said. Everything was buried. The concrete had been laid last night on this part of the bridge, another person said. Scores of people have been killed.
U.S. Republican lawmakers voiced deep concern on Thursday about reports that the Obama administration might allow Iran to use the dollar in some business transactions, although no such plans have been announced. U.S. government officials said the issue is being discussed in the Treasury Department, but any policy change would not involve widespread access for Iran to the U.S. financial system, disputing media reports suggesting otherwise. The Obama administration is considering easing some sanctions to permit non-U.S. companies to have some access to the U.S. financial system for U.S. dollar transactions involving Iran, said a U.S. official who spoke on condition of anonymity. The official said the matter was being studied, no decisions had been taken, and that, to the official's knowledge, none were imminent. The underlying reason for weighing the step is that non-U.S. companies now able to do business with Iran because of last year's nuclear deal find it difficult to do so without at some point touching the U.S. financial system. The official said such companies are getting conflicting messages from their own governments, which encourage trade with Iran, and from Washington, which emphasizes that it will enforce sanctions rigorously. Is the Brazilian president taking the fall for a whole class of corrupt politicians? Brazil's President Dilma Rousseff is fighting for her political survival. She has been abandoned by the party that was her main coalition partner, leaving her leading a minority government. And a combination of the worst recession in years, an unprecedented corruption investigation, and a push to have her impeached has left her government close to collapse. Rousseff is now struggling to save both her own reputation and the legacy of the Workers' Party, which has ruled Brazil for 13 years. But is she taking the fall for a whole class of corrupt politicians? At least 7 killed and dozens injured when blast hits police vehicle in Kurdish-dominated city of Diyarbakir. At least 7 officers were killed and 27 people wounded when a car bomb hit a police vehicle in Turkey's Kurdish-dominated city of Diyarbakir in the southeast of the country. Turkish officials have said Thursday's explosion, blamed by local officials on Kurdish fighters, took place near a busy bus terminal, damaging several cars and shattering almost all the windows of a multi-story building. Of those injured, 14 were civilians and 13 police officers. Regional offensive made up of 8,700 troops seeks to defeat the armed group, but it's fighting back with kidnapped girls. Adama Simila wears a knife tied to his belt by a piece of rope, his only protection against the Boko Haram group that has repeatedly targeted his hometown in remote northern Cameroon. While the threat once came from heavily armed, battle-hardened figures crossing from neighboring Nigeria, today Simile knows he is more likely to die at the hands of a teenage girl strapped with explosives. He says, "We are here to look out for suicide bombers," said the 31-year-old member of a local civilian defense force in the town of Kerawa. A regional offensive last year drove the fighters from most of their traditional strongholds. On the hunt in Belgium. Russian police detain 167 in restaurant raid. Russia holds live fire tank exercise near Ukraine. Colombian soldier recovering after 23 days in jungle. Iraqi special forces led march on ISIL-controlled Heath. Turkey's tourism drops amid security concerns. South Africa's answer to Schwarzenegger. Welcome back to Millennium TV News. Russian combat engineers arrive in ancient city on demining mission days after Syrian army retook it from ISIL. Russian combat engineers arrived in Syria on a mine-clearing mission in the ancient town of Palmyra after it was recaptured from Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant this week. On Thursday, the defense ministry said sapper units were airlifted to Syria with equipment including state-of-the-art robotic devices to defuse mines at the 2,000-years-old archaeological site. Russian television stations showed I-176 transport planes with engineers landing before dawn at the Russian airbase in Syria. Sunday's recapture of Palmyra by Syrian troops under the cover of Russian airstrikes was an important victory over ISIL fighters who controlled the area for 10 minutes. Video captured on the border between Arizona and Mexico's Sonora state shows two young men scaling the international border fence. A Mexican news channel was filming on the Arizona side of the border when the camera crew spotted this. Two young men climbing down into U.S. territory from Sonora, a Mexican state known for its drugs crime. The pair are undetected by U.S. Border Patrol officers. One of them carries a walkie-talkie. It's unclear what their backpacks contained and when this footage was shot. Shortly afterwards, they clambered over the fence again back into Mexico. The release of the video comes amid heated campaigning for the Republican primaries in the United States. Controversial frontrunner Donald Trump has vowed to build a wall spanning to international border to stop the flow of illegal migrants and drugs. Mexico says such a move would be bad for trade and the environment. About a third of the 3,000 kilometers border between the countries is fenced, and this barrier in Arizona is one of the most complete. A migrant from Syria now in Greece says it would have been better to stay home and die as others move on, facing an uncertain future. This is home now, a migrant camp along the Greek border. It's a place where desperate people come with hope for a better life. Syrian Miriam Mohammed is now full of the deepest regrets.
I don't know what to say. I regret that we left Syria every day. I regret it. It would have been better to die in Damascus. At least you know that you have died in your country and will be buried in your country. But here we are dying a slow death, our children and us.
Here along the border with Macedonia, they try to go on with life as a bus to take the migrants to an official reception center stands empty. A very different scene in Piraeus. Migrants are ready to move on. They board buses. Some are the more than 50,000 refugees in Greece. Some will be settled in Greece, others sent to Turkey. An uncertain future and a past filled with regret and fear. Belgian police wrap up a raid on an abandoned hotel near the French border, reportedly linked to a foiled attack on Paris. Belgian police search an abandoned hotel near the French border. They are looking for any links to a foiled plot to carry out an attack in Paris. A woman who lives near the hotel says the doors have been closed for years.
The hotel hasn't been open for 3 years. It's empty. In theory, no one should be there. But recently there has actually been quite a lot of activity there. But apart from that, I don't know anything.
The search comes after French police conducted a raid in the Paris suburbs last week and discovered a stash of weapons. Officials in Belgium offered no details on my endings as the country continues to grapple with a threat that left more than 30 people dead in dual attacks last week. Russian police say they have detained 167 members of criminal gangs in a restaurant raid in Yekaterinburg. Russia's Interior Ministry released video on Thursday of a raid that night before a restaurant in the central city of Yekaterinburg where 167 suspected gang members were arrested. It was suspected organized crime gang leaders were meeting to distribute spheres of influence in Russia's Urals region, according to the Interior Ministry. SWAT teams and detectives from Russia's organized crime division swooped on the location, seizing 4 pistols, 14 knives, a wooden bat, a rubber truncheon, a pack of suspected hashish, and allegedly counterfeit spirits, according to the Interior Ministry. The 167 detainees were taken for identification and fingerprinting. Russian tanks are taking part in a live-fire military exercise close to the border with Ukraine. Russia finished 3 days of tank live fire exercises in its southern military district on Wednesday, close to the border with Ukraine. Over 30 T-72 and T-98 tanks were involved in the drills at a training ground in southern Volgograd region. Over the course of 3 days, tank crews spent 50 hours in the field practicing battle skills, driving through water pits, firing while on the move and hitting several targets simultaneously. The exercise took place as the security situation in parts of eastern Ukraine deteriorated. Extended at the end of last year, the Minsk peace deal signed by Russia, Ukraine, France and Germany aimed to give Ukraine back control of its border with Russia, see all heavy weapons withdrawn, return hostages and allow an internationally monitored local elections in the east. But increased violence in parts of rebel-controlled areas in recent weeks have jeopardized a fragile peace. Russia holds a live-fire tank exercise near Ukraine. Russian tanks are taking part in a live-fire military exercise close to the border with Ukraine. Colombian soldier who was missing for 23 days in the jungle is recovering after being found by fellow troops this week. 23 days had passed before Colombian troops stumbled upon a weakened trained Yefer Sanchez. The 26-year-old soldier had been separated from his unit while in patrol in the central Meta province, an area known for heavy rebel activity. Sanchez thanked his fellow comrades for persevering with their search. He says he survived by eating plant leaves, turtle meat and fruit but 1 day without water. Sanchez was promptly returned to base where doctors say it is recovering well. At least 15 troops killed in ISIL attacks, including 8 after a convoy was struck by a suicide car bomber. 8 Iraqi soldiers were killed on Thursday after an ISIL suicide car bomber detonated near an army convoy advancing towards the town of Heath during an operation to oust the armed group, military sources told media. Iraqi special forces backed by army troops and US-led coalition airstrikes moved on the town in western Anbar province that has been for months under the control of Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant. The number of foreign visitors going to Turkey fell 10% in February, the biggest drop in a decade amid security concerns for a country feeling the spillover effects from the war in Syria.
It's the biggest drop in a decade. The number of foreign tourists arriving in Istanbul falling 10% in February, according to official data available this week, as widening security fears keep away more and more would-be holiday makers. In Istanbul, Turkey, where a spate of recent bombings is putting pressure on the tourist industry. Experts estimate that revenue from tourism could fall by a quarter this year. That's $8 billion, or 1% of GDP. Turkey's been hit by 4 bombings already this year, 2 in the capital Ankara and 2 more in Istanbul. It's the 2 in Istanbul that have worried the hospitality industry. One of those attacks came in January, killing 12 German tourists in the city's historic heart. Another this month killed 3 Israeli tourists and 1 Iranian. Unfortunately for Turkey, it's the tourists from the richest countries who spend the most and who are the most easily spooked by security fears. Already, German holiday company TUI is seeing a 40% decline in summer bookings. But the biggest hit may come from the Russians. Traditionally, Russians make up the second largest group after the Germans, and fewer of them are coming because of an economic crisis at home that has put pressure on their ruble currency, as well as a chill in relations with Turkey.
Bodybuilding champion Tumi Masete is opening gyms to give other poor South Africans a chance to lead a healthier and more prosperous life.
He's a bodybuilding champion with biceps the size of brandy barrels, and he's become South Africa's answer to Arnold Schwarzenegger. But now Tumi Masete spends more of his time trying to help people in this rundown Johannesburg suburb to lead a healthy and more prosperous life. Talking to you from the house where Masete built his first gym. Here, a decade ago, Arnold Schwarzenegger's once trainer, Reg Park, came to see Masete after hearing of his talents during a visit to South Africa. Park taught Masete about nutrition and health, leading him on the path to winning many national championships. Masete has transformed himself from a bodybuilding champion into a relatively successful businessman. He's opened 3 of his Akasi gyms in the Alexandra township. Not only does he want to train the next generation of South African bodybuilding champions, he also wants to help the community. Akasi Gym has helped stroke victims to recover, Masite has taught young kids who've had trouble with the law or have been involved in drugs. He told me he'd love to do more. He'd like to train sports in schools and also to open a centre for paraplegic athletes.
It's hard for me to sponsor them, you know, and I'm trying my best. Sometimes I use money from my child's pocket and have to help the guys because I see they love the sports. And if I'm not the last man standing in the township to help these guys, nobody will help them.
Eventually, Masite would like to do for township gyms what Richard Branson's Virgin Active brand did for other fitness enthusiasts in South Africa. But what Masite says he'll never lose is a sense of community spirit in townships like Alexandra, where many people feel left behind.
Let's have a look at Millennium TV Around the World News Recap. Protesters say Turkey's Erdogan must step down. Sickening sex abuse alleged in car by UN peacekeepers. Police workers and students clash again in Paris. South Korea repatriates Chinese soldiers killed in Korean War. And crackdown on illegal migrants bound for Hong Kong. Obama hosts world leaders at White House. US, South Korea, Japan pledge security cooperation. India bridge collapse kills 14, scores feared trapped. Republicans alarmed at talk US may ease Iran trade. And will Brazil's drama Rousseff be impeached? Car bomb kills police in Turkey's Diyarbakir. Weekend Boko Haram sends girl bombers against Cameroon. You are up to date with your top stories so far here on Millennium TV, and don't forget to log into www.millenniumtv.net. Thank you for staying with us. Allah Hafiz.